The first time I saw him, he was washing blood off his boots in silence. No name, no insignia, just a dull glint of steel catching the Algerian sun. His hands moved with the precision of someone who'd done this before, too many times. He told me in broken French, "We are not soldiers, we are weapons, discarded after the war is over." Silence. A crow landed nearby, pecking at something in the sand. A scrap of cloth, maybe a piece of a uniform, maybe a man. Why would France need an army of ghosts? 1831 wasn't just a year, it was a wound reopening. France needed conquest, but not sacrifice. So they did something unthinkable. They created an elite force composed entirely of foreigners, men with no names, no homeland, no past. A legion where no one asks questions and no one dares answer them. It was brilliant and brutal. Because how do you mourn what was never acknowledged? But this wasn't about patriotism. This was strategy dressed as redemption. They told the world, we offer a second chance to the lost. But what they really meant was, you'll die for us, and no one will ask why. There was a man, Janos, from Budapest. He used to be a thief, maybe worse. But inside the Legion, he became a machine. I remember him cleaning his rifle like it was sacred. This is my past now, and my future. A rifle, nothing more. And when he disappeared during a recon in Mali, there was no ceremony, just a nod from the sergeant. He served. Who? The Legion became France's sharpest blade and its dirtiest secret, sent to the darkest corners of empire, Algeria, Indochina, Chad, places where regular troops couldn't go, or wouldn't, places where silence was more valuable than victory. Because the Legion doesn't leave records, it leaves echoes. But what do you call men who fight for a country that will never claim them? Patriots? Mercenaries? Or something worse, something without a soul? What if the Legion isn't a path to redemption, but a graveyard with better PR? There's a statue in Albania where the Legion is based. It's of a legionnaire marching, face down, weapon in hand. The inscription reads, "You are a legionnaire. You are a volunteer serving France with honor and fidelity." But look closer. The eyes are blank, just like the files, just like the memories, just like the graves. So I ask you, are these men warriors or ghosts in uniform? And if you wore that uniform, what would you become? But this was only the surface. The blueprint for one of history's most disposable armies was just being drawn. The year was 1831. Paris smelled of soot and politics. Revolution still echoed in the gutters, and King Louis-Philippe, eager to tighten his grip without spilling noble blood, signed a decree that would shape war forever. A new unit was born, not of France, but for France, the French Foreign Legion, a name that promised valor, a reality that reeked of utility. Imagine it, a unit designed to bleed for an empire that didn't want its own sons to die. Men plucked from the fringes, criminals, deserters, failed revolutionaries, tossed together like scrap metal into a forge of discipline and brutality. The idea was brilliant in its coldness. France wanted Algeria, but French citizens, they wanted Paris, wine, and revolution songs. So they outsourced the blood. And Algeria wasn't just a battlefield, it was hell rehearsing its lines. The sun there doesn't set, it burns. The ground cuts, the air lies. And into this furnace, the Legion marched. There was this German, Wilhelm, used to be a violinist in Munich, lost everything in a duel gone wrong. I met him during an assignment to Fort l'Empereur. He still carried a piece of string in his pocket. "To remember sound," he said. "Out here, everything's just dust and screaming." He died 3 weeks later, throat slit by raiders during a convoy ambush. No funeral, just dirt, and a new number assigned to his bed. See, the Legion wasn't about who you were. It was about what you could endure, how many lashes you could take, how far you could march, how long you could stare at a corpse without flinching. It was strategy camouflaged as redemption. Colonialism needed soldiers, but it didn't need stories. So they gave the Legion no identity, no hometowns, no family ties, just orders. In Algeria, they were told, cleanse, conquer, control. And if they fell, France wouldn't even claim the body. Because, technically, they weren't French. And that was the genius. Strategic detachment. If a battle failed, Paris could shrug. Foreigners, they'd say, not our fault. If it succeeded, well, glory has a way of rewriting names. But let's stop for a second. What kind of man signs up to fight for a flag that doesn't belong to him? Desperation? Delusion? Discipline? Or something darker? Maybe it was the hope that dying in someone else's war was still better than living in your own shame. Back in Marseille, I met a Polish recruit named Marek. He didn't speak a word of French, got beaten constantly, but every morning he shaved perfectly. "For the uniform," he told me, "because even if I'm nothing, this makes me someone." He never made it to Algeria, caught pneumonia in boot camp, died coughing up blood, clutching his shaving kit. I remember thinking, was this what they meant by honor? Because in the Legion, honor wasn't a virtue. It was a currency, a performance, something sold to the desperate and bought by the indifferent. A weapon, without a flag, but not without cost. Because once a man gives up his name, his story, his past, what's left to lose? Only his body. And maybe that was the point all along. But this was only the beginning. The Legion hadn't just been forged, it was about to be mythologized. And that myth was born in the sands of Mexico, where 30 men chose to die beautifully rather than live forgotten. April 30th, 1863. The sun over Mexico wasn't merciful, it was savage. The kind of heat that dries sweat before it even hits your skin. In a dusty outpost near the village of Cameron de Tejeda, 33 legionnaires stood their ground against 2,000. Yes, you heard that right. 33 versus 2,000. Madness? No. A legend being carved from blood. Captain Jean d'Anjou was their leader, a man with a wooden hand and iron will. Lost his real one in Algeria. Some said he carved the prosthetic himself. Others whispered it was a priest who gave it to him, as if d'Anjou had struck a deal with God for one more war. But there was no God at Cameron, only heat and bullets. d'Anjou gathered his men behind a crumbling hacienda wall. No escape, no reinforcements, no illusions. He knew the math, so did they. But before the first shot was fired, he made them swear an oath. "We will fight to the death," he said, "and not surrender." One of them, Legionnaire Maine, a Belgian with a laugh like gravel, looked at the captain's hand and asked, "Even you?" d'Anjou didn't smile, just nodded. And the gunfire began. Boom, then silence, then chaos. They fought like ghosts possessed by purpose, every bullet a vow, every bayonet thrust a line in a sacred script. By noon, they were down to half. By afternoon, they were out of water. By evening, 6 were left. They fixed bayonets and charged into a wall of rifles. And then, only 3, wounded, out of ammo, surrounded. The Mexican commander, Colonel Milan, watched them crawl to their feet. He offered mercy. they refused. Until Milan, out of something deeper than respect, shouted, "They are not men, they are demons!" and ordered his men to stop firing. Those 3 survivors were taken prisoner, but treated like royalty, fed, healed, even honored. Why? Because even in defeat, the Legion had won. Not territory, not treasure, but myth. Captain Danjou's prosthetic hand was recovered. Today, it's locked in the glass case in Aubonne, guarded like a relic, touched once a year, paraded like a holy artifact. But ask yourself, is it a symbol of sacrifice or psychological warfare in disguise? Because here's the truth. The Legion didn't need to win battles. It needed to win minds. And Cameroon became its cathedral of martyrdom. The cult of La Mission Sacrée was born that day, the sacred mission, the idea that dying for your brothers, dying beautifully, hopelessly, is more valuable than surviving anonymously. That is how you build a recruitment machine. You don't promise glory, you promise meaning, even if it comes dressed as death. I remember meeting a legionnaire in Mali, Russian, quiet, never smiled. He had Danjou's hand tattooed over his heart. It's not about winning, it's about leaving nothing behind. That chills you, doesn't it? Because what does it take to convince men to die for nothing? Or worse, for a legend that feeds on their bones? And yet, that legend would march on, from the heat of Mexico to the jungles of Indochina, where the ghosts of Cameroon would whisper into the ears of new recruits marching toward another glorious ruin. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. The rain hadn't stopped in 4 days, and everything he owned was wet. Boots, rifle, soul. They said it was just another jungle, he muttered, but jungles don't bite back like this. His name was Henri, a Frenchman by blood, but legionnaire by desperation. His last letter home was a confession, half love, half goodbye. Dien Bien Phu, you don't forget that name. It's not just a place, it's a reckoning. 1954, northern Vietnam, a valley encircled by hills. The French command believed it was the perfect trap for the Viet Minh, but they forgot to ask who was trapping who. General Henri Navarre, commanding the French forces, wanted a decisive victory. He believed his fortified garrison could withstand any assault. He saw the jungle as a backdrop, not a battlefield. He was wrong. Because across those hills, watching like shadows stitched into the trees, was General Vo Nguyen Giap, a master of asymmetrical warfare, a man who'd studied every mistake made by colonial empires, and he saw France's arrogance for what it was, an invitation. So the Viet Minh began dragging artillery by hand through the jungle, up cliffs, through mud, over bamboo bridges built in silence. It took weeks, but when the first shells fell on the French position, it wasn't a battle, it was judgment. And the legionnaires? They were on the front lines of a war they didn't start, in a country they couldn't spell, surrounded by an enemy that never slept. The rain rotted their boots, the insects never stopped, snipers haunted every step, malaria whispered through the tents like a silent assassin, and every message from Paris felt more like a betrayal than a lifeline. One by one the outposts fell. One by one the men broke. There was Tomas, a Czech recruit who'd fought the Nazis just a decade earlier. Now he was digging trenches with bloody hands screaming into the fog. "This isn't a war, it's a graveyard, with drums." And still they held. Because the Legion doesn't surrender until there's nothing left. Dien Bien Phu wasn't just a military disaster. It was the moment France realized it wasn't invincible. That flags don't survive where belief doesn't follow. General Navarre sent desperate telegrams to Paris, pleas, warnings, ignored. Back home, the cafes were full, the headlines cold, and in the jungle, legionnaires bled for headlines no one would read. On May 7, 1954, the garrison fell. Thousands captured. Many never spoken of again. The Viet Minh walked through the ruins like archaeologists studying hubris. And the ghosts of Cameroon, they didn't save anyone that day. Because mythology doesn't stop artillery. But you have to ask, did France lose a colony that day? Or did it lose the last illusion that its empire still meant something? I remember a quote from a captured legionnaire's journal found later by a journalist. Quote, "I fought for a flag I never saluted. I died in a jungle that never learned my name." Tell me, would you die for a war you never understood? Because the Legion did. And as the dust of Dien Bien Phu settled, its warriors vanished again into the next desert, the next mission, the next forgotten war. You don't see them coming. No parades, no headlines, just a silhouette on the edge of a desert road. Rifle slung low, eyes scanning the horizon like a hawk that forgot how to blink. That's the modern legionnaire. After Indochina and Algeria, the big wars went quiet, but the Legion didn't. It just moved into the shadows. Places like Djibouti, Chad, Gabon, Central African Republic. Names that don't scream glory, but make no mistake, this was war, just without witnesses. The mission? Protect pipelines, eliminate insurgents, secure influence. Not for medals, not for liberation, for relevance. I met a Senegalese legionnaire in Djibouti. Name was Issa. He used to be a fisherman. Said the ocean stopped feeding him. The Legion, it fed everyone, even if the meal tasted like sand and gunpowder. He once dragged a wounded sergeant 20 kilometers under fire just to be told, "Good job." No rank, no record, just "good job." Silence. Then deployment to another nameless operation. Chad became the beating heart of these silent wars. Operation Manta, 1983. Officially a French response to Libyan aggression. Unofficially, a chess match in the Sahara. The Legion played night, fast, lethal, disposable. They guarded oil fields, crushed rebel convoys, hunted warlords through dry riverbeds and ghost towns. No press, no oversight. Just orders whispered through static radios and sand-stained maps. And when something went wrong, they weren't there, because the Legion doesn't exist on paper, only in blood. One night in Tbilisi, I saw a patrol return, missing 2 men. No one cried, no one asked. The sergeant wrote down coordinates. The replacements arrived by dawn. Like changing parts on a weapon, not mourning comrades. Because in these wars, the enemy isn't just insurgents, it's obscurity, irrelevance, the creeping fear that your sacrifice means nothing if no one remembers it. There was a corporal named Luke, French, technically, born in Marseille, joined the Legion to escape prison. He said, "I fought 6 wars once, watching vultures circle above a dried village, but I haven't existed in 10 years. He grinned. Maybe that's the point. So I ask you, what keeps a soldier fighting when the world doesn't know he's at war? Some say duty, others say madness. But maybe it's because the Legion has replaced home with habit, mission with meaning, pain with purpose. Even if that purpose is buried under silence and sand. And while the world watched Berlin fall and Baghdad burn, the Legion marched on, unseen, like veins beneath the skin of empire, pumping blood into a dying beast. But beasts don't go quietly, and neither did the men who wore that uniform. The wars weren't over. They were just harder to find.
He stood at attention, trembling slightly. The Sahara wind cut through his uniform, but he didn't flinch. No name, no past, just a number on a tag, and the weight of a silence he hadn't earned yet. The French Foreign Legion doesn't just take your passport, it takes you. Day 1 of training, recruits are told to forget who they were. You're no longer Sergei from Kiev or Miguel from Madrid. You're simply Legionnaire, one of many, a ghost forged in mud, sweat, and command. I remember watching a ceremony at Castelnaudary. Recruits, still bleeding from blisters and drills, lined up to receive their new identities. One whispered a name under his breath, his real one. A sergeant overheard. He didn't speak again for a week. They say the Legion breaks you down to build you back up, but what happens if you never get built again? There was Ahmed, a Tunisian teenager who forged documents just to enlist. He wanted a new life. Instead, he got 40 days of hazing so brutal he could barely walk. When I saw him again, his voice was different, not quieter, colder. "March or die," he muttered. A motto or a sentence? Because inside the Legion, discipline is religion, punishment is scripture. You run till your lungs tear, you drill till the desert spins, and if you fail, you disappear. The training isn't just physical, it's psychological warfare on your own soul. Recruits are isolated, humiliated, sometimes broken entirely. Language is stripped, old beliefs crushed, even memories start to blur. One Legionnaire confessed, "I can't remember my mother's face, but I can field strip a rifle in 30 seconds blindfolded." What kind of man emerges from that crucible? A warrior or a shell? There's a ceremony called Képi Blanc, when a recruit finally earns the Legion's iconic white cap. It's supposed to be a moment of pride, but I've seen men cry through it, not from joy, from loss. Because to wear that cap, you must bury who you were, and some graves are deeper than others. But here's the paradox. The same ritual that dehumanizes also unifies. These men, broken, reshaped, become something terrifyingly effective. They move as one, think as one, kill as one. Not because they love France, but because the Legion became the only mirror that showed them anything. There was a Romanian named Vlad, former gang member, scarred, hardened, ruthless. But in the Legion he found silence. The beatings don't hurt, not like thinking used to. He smiled when he said it. That scared me more than any war. So now I ask you, can stripping away the self create a better warrior or just a better slave? Because the Legion doesn't wear armor. It becomes it, layer by layer, order by order, until the man inside is a rumor, a shadow, a whisper in a language he no longer speaks. But shadows don't bleed. Not where the Legion is going next. Kabul, 2009. A dust storm rolled in fast, swallowing the outpost like a god exhaling fury. In the middle of it stood a legionnaire, helmet tilted, rifle low, staring into nothing. He looked ancient, not by age, but by presence, as if the war around him was just the latest chapter in a very old book. The Legion had arrived in Afghanistan, and the world had changed. No more muskets and bayonets. Now it was drones, data, satellites, high-tech death with a digital face. But the Legion, it still marched, still fought, still bled, just without the headlines. They were deployed to Mali too, Operation Serval, 2013. Dust, heat, insurgents. Same script, new geography. The Legion became France's scalpel in the Sahel, precise, quiet, and utterly relentless. But here's the twist. While warfare evolved, so did the Legion itself. Not in its tactics, in its flesh. The faces changed. East Europeans, Africans, Latin Americans, even ex-gang members from the banlieues of Paris and the slums of Sao Paulo. Men who saw the Legion not as exile, but as evolution, a rebirth through fire. I met a Ukrainian named Oleg in Timbuktu, former MMA fighter. He said, "I had two choices, prison or this." He pointed to his boots. These made more sense. And in a way he was right, because the Legion offers something rare in this world: purpose without identity. But purpose is a fragile thing. Enter General Bruno Dari, a reformer. He wanted modernization, integration, accountability, better training, tighter discipline, less mystery, less myth. Some say he tried to tame a beast, others say he neutered it. Under Dari, the Legion adopted tech, tightened legal structures, improved internal justice. The idea was simple: bring the Legion into the 21st century. But can you modernize a ghost? There were whispers inside the ranks that the soul of the Legion was being diluted, that becoming normal made them vulnerable. One veteran spat, "They want us to be soldiers now. We were never soldiers. We were Legion." Still, the world changed, and the Legion survived. Not because it stayed the same, but because it adapted in the shadows. High-tech gear on bodies that still marched like it was Cameron. Drones overhead, but the boots still sink in the same sand. So I ask you, can the Legion remain feared without becoming obsolete? Or, worse, domesticated? Because in the end, tradition only lives as long as someone bleeds for it. And the Legion? It's still bleeding. But its enemies aren't the same, and neither are its ghosts. There's a stretch of road near Aubon, cracked and quiet, where old legionnaires sometimes walk alone. No medals, no fanfare, just shadows in civilian clothes, haunted by the silence that followed them home. One of them, Renee, 92, blind in one eye, once whispered to me, "The uniform came off, the Legion didn't." And maybe that's the truth no one wants to say aloud. The French Foreign Legion isn't a military unit. It's a contradiction wrapped in tradition, stitched with pain, sealed with myth. It offers glory without identity, discipline without belonging, sacrifice without memory. From Algeria's fire to Indochina's jungle, from the sandstorms of Chad to the data wars of Kabul, the Legion has carried France's sword into battles too dirty for headlines. But always under one condition: don't ask who these men are, because if you ask, the illusion shatters. They are exiles, outcasts, criminals, dreamers,
Martyrs, machines. They march not for a homeland, but for the ritual of motion. They fight not for freedom, but for the silence that follows obedience. They die and vanish. No names, no graves, just the rustle of a white kepi in a place it shouldn't be. The Legion is useful, and usefulness in war is currency. But it's also a chain, because once you are forged into a weapon with no past, the world will never see you as a man again, only as a tool. And tools don't retire, they rust. So I ask you one last time, is the French Foreign Legion a sanctuary for the lost, or a prison disguised as brotherhood? You decide. But remember, the next time you see a man without a name marching into someone else's war, you might be looking at what's left of a ghost that once had dreams.